Hello everyone, Rhonda here and welcome back to my studio. Today I am going to paint some white roses with you. Now I find that white roses are one of the things that I find a little more difficult because I tend to get them too light too quickly and wash them out. So that's why I wanted to work on them. And I thought I'd take you on that journey and show you some of the tips and tricks that I used to keep my white roses looking three-dimensional. So we'll go on down to my table and I will show you what I'm going to use today. So we'll start out by showing you what I have set up for painting the florals today. I'm going to be working on some white roses, like I mentioned. So this is my palette that I have set out. I have my Hansa yellow and my yellow oxide. I decided not to put out the Dariolide yellow today. Dariolide I tend to use more in my landscapes. I've got my naphthol red light, pine green, and burnt sienna. There's my phthalo blue, and then I put out both the violets this time. So this is the red violet, and this is the quinacridone violet. I really like the quinacridone violet for florals. I find it very beautiful. And I have two whites here. So this is the titanium white. That is it's a PW6. It is your value 10 white. And because I am painting white roses today, I also put out my medium white. Now, medium white it's a mixed color from Heritage, and it's made by mixing the PW6, which is your titanium white, with a PY42, which is yellow oxide. And that gives you a color that is just a little bit of a yellowish white, kind of a warm white. And there's a reason I decided to put this out. When I'm painting white roses, which is what I'm going to do today, I have a very bad habit of going to the value 10 white way too quickly. And that tends to wash out the roses and you lose all your shadows and that sort of thing. So one of the things that I've done to help myself get through that, because I find when you have a habit that you don't like and that is affecting your art, I like to come up with ways to solve that. And also I like to then practice those things. So I struggle sometimes with white roses, which is why I'm practicing them. Sometimes I will actually just sit down and start just painting random ones on a board like this to see if I can work on painting different kinds of roses. So by putting out the medium white, what I'm going to do is in this painting, I'm going to use that medium white for pretty much the whole painting until I get to where I want to put the final highlights on, and then I'll use the value 10 white. And that's going to keep me from washing everything out. Now, I will put a link to a video series that I did on painting in monochromatic color tones, which is your blacks and whites. I did a black, white, grayscale. Monochromatic just means you're using one color and various tones of it. And I chose to do black, white, and gray. So I will put a link to that and you'll be able to see in there how painting in a monochromatic scheme like that helped me with that same problem. It's another way to get your head wrapped around using the shades and using the simultaneous contrast, which is where you put, if you have a dark background and you put a medium color on it, that color is going to look lighter than if you put it on a light background. Simultaneous contrast. I describe it quite a bit in that other video. So this is what my palette is set up. I put out actually this knife here because I want to play around with my background a little bit. The background in contemporary florals can be quite fun. And so I want to play with this knife to get extra paint on there and some patterns and stuff and just see what it's going to look like. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. And I have my 3/4 inch fusion flat, and I decided today to use my number 10 fusion flat. I also have a little cap or a little bottle of extender here. This is the extender medium from Heritage. It will keep the paint open a little bit longer if I want to have the paint a little bit more open. This board here is just it's an 8x10. It's a 1/8 inch thick piece of MDF. I coated it with a background basic gray, and then I sanded that. I like to use these boards to paint on, especially with the florals, because you don't you can get smoother lines than you could on a canvas. So that's what I've got there. I'll put links to all of that in the description for you, and let's get started with this painting. All right, so one thing that I decided today that I wanted to do is I wanted to have, because I'm doing white roses, I wanted to put kind of a cooler background because I'm going to add some warmth to the roses, and so I wanted to have kind of a cooler background. So I really like this quinacridone color. So I'm going to put some of that out, and for this I will use the actual white. But I want to lighten that up. But see how that's quite a cool color? And that's going to be part of my background. I want to make a little bit of blue as well, because I like how the pink and blue look together. I'm just going to put a bunch of this out here like this, and mix a bunch of it together like this. And then what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take my scraper brush here. I'm going to put some of this on it, and I'm going to just start putting this on my background. And I'm going to mix up quite a bit more of it here. I'm going to actually use the scraper to mix up some of this. And put that on there in various patterns, just to make an interesting background to put the roses on. This is quite a bold background so far, but we can always tone it down if we want. I like to do a cross pattern. That's St. Andrew's cross, which is a it's a common pattern used by the Dutch in their paintings. But I'm also doing quite a bit of, I'm kind of filling in this background quite a bit on this one, just because I want to have, I kind of want to cover that gray background on the board that I had, because I don't really care for that gray background too much for this. You see the nice patterns that this is making? I'm going to do a little bit of red violet in here as well. Add a bit of a different violet to it. And this part, when you're just doing this, this is just fun. You just want to play with it. Just have fun with it. Try things. You'll never know if something's going to work the way you want it to unless you try. You know, see, that looks kind of neat having that blue in there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a little bit more blue in. Maybe I want to take some of that blue and put a real nice cross in there, in that blue. Maybe have a little bit more light up in this side, because I'm going to have my light coming in from this direction. So I'm going to lighten up that area a little bit. Just add in some of that to make it look different. You can scrape it on, scrape it off, whatever you want to make it look the way you want that background to look. I quite like that. This is kind of quite a bold contemporary sort of a background. Sometimes it's fun to get bold. Sometimes it's hard to get bold, but it is also fun. If you find that you have areas that you want to just kind of smooth out a little bit, you can take your brush and smooth some of those areas out. I kind of like it the way it is, but I'm going to take this thick paint off my edge and move that back into the painting a little bit. Don't some of these colors make it look quite neat? I'm going to go a little bit darker and have a streak or two of that dark in it. Let's get real bold and put a real dark streak down the center. You notice what a difference that makes using the brush versus the scraper though. It makes quite a difference in how it's going to look. If I want to add in a bit more thicker, I'll come back in with my scraper and add in some of that. Add a streak, let's do that. Just a big red streak. That looks pretty wild, hey? Yeah, I like that. Okay. Now, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to let that background dry a little bit because I don't want the background to be too wet when I go into stuff. I'm just going to take, there's a ridge there that I'm just kind of taking down. I don't want that background to be too wet. So I'm going to give it a few minutes to just dry down a little bit, and then I'll come back. So I basically let this sit for about 5 minutes here while I varnished some other work I was working on. So you can see it's mostly dry. There's still a few little tacky areas, but nothing too concerning. So when I start out with my roses, what I like to do is I like to first make a bit of a gray to kind of base in where my roses are going to be. I like the gray that it makes when you take your red, violet, and your blue. So I'm just going to mix those, or not red, violet, and blue, naphthol red, light, and blue. Mix those together. Kind of a browny gray. And I'm going to start making sure that I'm using this color instead. Using that that medium weight instead of the titanium weight. So I've decided I'm going to have my light coming in from this side. So I want to have kind of my main rose. I'm thinking I'm going to have it kind of sitting just a little off center. I'm going to have it opening this direction. So the opening is going to be this direction. The light's going to be hitting it this side. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that in just with a base gray, just so you can kind of see where it's going to be. That's going to be my main rose. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have another rose kind of coming down here, pointing downward, I think. It's still a little wet, but not too bad. Another rose kind of pointing downward. It might connect with that one. And then I think I'll just have the shadows of some roses back there and maybe down here. I'll just have where it looks like there's maybe some more roses in the bush. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to figure out where my centers are going to be. So when I'm doing that, I like to take the red violet and I take some of that on my brush and I come down about 1/3 of the way and I start putting in the center of this rose. I'm going to start small in the center here, and my petals are going to get bigger the further out I go. And you see how as soon as I put that center in, that deep center, now all of a sudden it's starting to look a little like a rose. Now I'm actually going to take some of the quinacridone violet here for my shadow. So because the light's coming from this side, my shadow is going to be on this side of the rose. And the reason I'm using violet for those shadows is because my shadows are cool. So where the sun strikes it is going to be warm. So I'm going to be using my warmer colors to warm that side, and my shadow side is going to be cooler. Now, when I go to do these other roses that are a little bit further back, I'm going to tone down that difference a bit. So this is simultaneous contrast again. So this will be dark up against a light. So that is going to really pop forward. Whereas down here, I don't want it to be quite as dark because I'm because this rose is going to kind of disappear down here. And these ones here, I'll just kind of put a little bit of something in there because that's just the impression of rose. This is impressionist painting. So my main focus is going to be on my queen rose here, and then the rest of this is going to be the rest of it is going to kind of fade into the background a bit. So I want to start by taking a nice kind of warmer color. And one thing I'm also going to do on this one is I'm going to take some of this Hansa yellow, and I'm going to just put a streak or two of that on the warm side here. Now most of that's going to get covered up, but I kind of want to just have that extra warmth there. I'm going to have maybe a little bit of it down here on this one, not quite as much, but I'm just going to put that extra warmth in there to be kind of an undertone. Now I want to take my white and have it, you know, toned up a little bit with that. I'm going to have it warmed up a little bit with that yellow, and I'm going to do a front petal. So I'm just going to cut across the front like that, and then I'm going to come down towards the shadow. And I've decided that for this part I'm going to kind of use this color the way it is for the most part for this part, and then I'll change it a bit as I go further into the painting. So I've got those front petals on. Now I want to go and I want to put some reaching petals down here. So I'm going to kind of take them in like this, and I'm going to use my finger to just put that shadow in there. I'm going to have another one here. And the faster you paint this, the more natural and the less stiff it'll look. So I'm going to go over into a little bit of the cool color as I move over this side, and I'm going to kind of have that cool color in there, and then I'm just going to kind of fade that off and have it disappear on this side. And this side is going to kind of be disappearing, whereas this side I want to have here I'm losing my edges, and here I'm having very defined edges. And what that's going to do is that's going to make this warm side of the rose pop forward and this part fade into that background. So I'm going to take a little bit of that, and I'm going to throw in some petals back here. A lot of that's going to be smaller petals behind the rose. And if I feel like I put in too much of that, I can always come back in with my violet, like that deep violet for there, and I can reinforce that center again. If I ever feel like I'm losing my shadow, I just put it back in. So you need to have that bowl shadow in there for it to look like a rose. I'm going to take some more of this warmer color, and I'm going to add some more petals up here. So have them kind of put them in. And when I use my finger, what I'm doing is I'm shearing the paint to push the shadow back into it. And I'm going to go with this cooler one to kind of close off this side of the rose here. But again, I'm not doing too much definition on this side, because this side I want it to kind of disappear. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take some more of my warm, and I'm going to put a little bit of this white in it to just lighten it up a bit. And I'm going to put another row of petals on here, and I'm going to push that shadow up into it. But by starting with that medium white instead of the titanium white, I'm not going, this is well below a 10. Value 10 is what that is. This is more of, you know, between a 7 and an 8 that I'm using here. Bring in another row of petals here on the outside. kind of want to have this one come up a little higher there. But the key is you always want to maintain that shadow, because if you lose your shadow, you've lost the shape of your rose. And keep in mind that your petals closer to the center of your rose are going to be a lot smaller than these big ones on the outside. And that's just how roses grow. Okay, so now I'm going to let that tack up a little bit, and I'm going to come in here with a little bit of a more toned color here. Make it just a little bit grayer. Add in some of that gray. If we can even go and mix up a little bit more of that gray here. Keeping in mind that your blue is quite powerful. Mix up a little bit more of that gray just to have there to bring into some of this, because I'm going to keep these other roses a little bit more on the gray side. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put my front petal on it, keeping in mind that it's pointing downward. And I just realized one thing. You'll notice what I forgot to do on that one is I forgot to put in my bowl shadow. So I'm going to have, since the sunlight's hitting this side, I'm going to have my shadow come onto this side of that rose. You don't want to lose that center shadow. Now I'm going to go ahead and put that petal in. And if you find that you're struggling a little bit with making these ones that point downward, you can always flip your board like this and do it with the rose pointing the direction that you're used to. You shouldn't do that all the time because it's better to learn to paint in many different ways, but that's just a little tip if you're struggling. I'm going to go in here to some of this a little bit lighter stuff and add a little yellow to it to warm it up. And I'm going to put in some of the reaching petals here. Now I'm going to let these cross right over into that rose for now, and then I'll bring that one back up over top. And I'm going to stick to the more grayer tones over here as I have that kind of go out that way. But again, I don't want to lose that bowl shadow, because the minute I lose that bowl shadow, I've lost the shape of my rose. And if I feel like I've gone, a little too far down here, I've lost my center. So I'm going to come back in. I'm going to paint over that and give myself back my center to my rose. And then I'll come in with my color here and do those petals that cut across the front. Now these ones out here, I'm not going to do much with at all. I'm just going to kind of do the impression of a rose, because they're just going to be in the background. So I'm not worrying too much about them. And the faster you paint them, the more they're just going to look like impressions of roses. You can have a little bit of light on that one because it's on the sunny side. And I'm going to have leaves kind of covering that and everything, so not too worried about those. I'm just going to put them in like that. Maybe have a little bit more light on that side there. another petal there. It's the impression of a rose. It's not, I'm not trying to make those ones look fancy like my main rose. Okay, so now I'm going to actually go back to that main rose because it's had time to tack up a little bit. This is being painted purely acrylic. I do have my extender out, but I haven't been using it. And one thing that I want to do, because of the simultaneous contrast, so that's where the whites will look lighter when I'm near the light areas, I want to put in some of my background greens and stuff. So I'm going to take my green and I'm going to put a little bit of burnt sienna in it to tone it down a little bit. And then I'm actually going to put a little bit of this violet in it because I want to make a darker green, kind of a cool dark green. And I'm going to come in here on this dark side and I'm going to put some of that in here. And I'm going to put some of it down here too, because this area can be in shadow. And you see how as soon as I put that darker color in there, this really pops off as being lighter. I'm going to go ahead and put some stems in. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go ahead and put some shadow down in this bottom area. Do you see what a difference that makes just adding in a little bit of that green? I'm going to bring it down a bit here. I'm going to actually go ahead and put a little bit of water in that to loosen it up. I'm going to put a leaf over here. And then I'm going to take where my light would be and I'm just going to take a little bit of that off. And we'll go in later and we'll put in more leaves, but I just wanted to kind of get that darker right around there. I'm going to rinse that green out of my brush. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to come in here and I want to start defining more petals. So I'm going to take my lighter color and I'm going to actually come down here instead of up there because I've gotten that quite full of the other color there, the violet, and I don't want any violet in this. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start putting in some more petals, and I'm keeping this quite, it almost looks yellow because I'm keeping it quite warm. And it's up to you. You have to decide when you're painting your roses how much, how many leaves you want or petals you want on the different areas and all of that sort of thing. Close that off a little bit there. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just redo these ones and kind of take them over top of that dark that I did. I'm going to come in and kind of do this one again a little bit too. You'll notice I kind of tend to, sometimes I'll go back and forth between the different roses, and that's just my personal preference. I like to do that. Add in another row there. Then I'm going to go into some of this color here, which is the cooler color, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to actually bring this petal back out over this other rose. Now I feel like I'm losing my shadow in there again. You see that? So I'm going to come back in with some of my violets. I'm just going to put that shadow right back in there. I don't want to lose my shadow. The minute you lose that bowl shadow, you've lost the shape of your rose. again, I'm going to just let those fade off. This is a broken edge, a lost edge back there. Okay. Now I'm going to come in over here again and just add some more petals right there. Now, one of the things that I want to do next, while I'm moving quickly, is now I want to start adding some more white to that rose. So I'm going to go in here first, and I'm just going to clear off a bit of my palette. Okay. So I'm going to come in here with quite a bit more white now. Still going to mix in a little bit of the medium white and just a touch of warmth to it. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to actually go in and I'm going to make some of these petals stand out a little bit more, making sure I don't lose my shadows in there. I'm going to come across the front again here with a nice white petal. So that's going to be my area at the front is going to be, I want the focus to be on that area. I'm going to come in here and just lighten up this edge a little bit, because the sun would be hitting that edge. And keep your brush moving relatively quickly, because it'll keep you from getting everything quite kind of getting it stuck and looking stiff. So we don't want it to look stiff. That's the big thing. And I'm going to start going even lighter, and I'm going to put another nice light one across the front there. And I'm going to put some nice light ones right there. Now, one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take that and then I'm going to dip into my white here with just the corner of my brush. I'm going to really come in here and define this petal. And that's a petal edging technique is what that's called. So I'm really defining the edge of that petal. So I'll have my paint, my little bit darker paint, and then I'll go in here and I'll just really take that white and define the edge of that petal. You see how that makes those petals really pop? And I'm going to take that and I'm going to do that in some of these areas here where the light would really be hitting it. Since I have my light coming from this direction, I'm going to go ahead and pop some light onto those petals. But I really want to focus on this center here. I'm going to take some of that pure white now and I'm going to add it in there because I want the front of that rose to really pop off. Add in another petal there. But you see how easy it would be for me to start to wash this whole thing out by adding this white. And that's why you got to be so careful with it. want to lose your shadows. Now that I've made those lighter, I'm going to make this one just a touch lighter as well. But I'm really going to bring out those edges. And come back in here with my shadow, or with my darker color too though, and make sure that I haven't washed that out. Come back in here with some of this medium white to make sure that there's still those shadows in there. Here I'm even going to take my finger and put more of a shadow in there by putting some more pressure on that, because I'm feeling like I'm really losing my shadow in that spot. And then I'm going to come in and tip into the white to make this petal really stand out. And at this point too, I'm adding some texture to make those petals pop forward. I'm putting in some real thick white there on that spot for my front of the rose. Really nice and thick, and then I'm still pushing that shadow back up into it. Take a little bit more of this and just kind of put a little bit more over here as well. I want to lighten this up quite a bit. Make sure that it's coming over top of that other rose. I can tip in and do a little bit of the petal edging on this one where the light would be hitting it. Again, being careful not to take out too much of what I did before, because I don't want to make it stiff. You see how that's looking quite nice now. And it is a white rose, even though I started with that more of a yellowish color to it. I'm going to actually take a little bit more of my pure white out. I'm going to tip into that pure white again, and I'm just going to make sure that I keep these edges open or nice and white. Put a little bit in there where the sun will hit that one. And maybe just a little bit down here. Okay, now I'm going to let my rose kind of, other than one other thing I want to do to it first. I want to take this dark violet, and I want to go back in here, and I just want to make sure that I haven't lost that deep center of my rose. Because that deep center is the other thing that's going to make it really look like a rose. Okay, so now I'm going to come in while I'm waiting for that rose to tack up a little bit, and I'm going to put in some leaves. So on my sunny side, I want to have kind of a nice lighter green leaf here, something a little warmer. I might use a little bit of that yellow oxide in it. I'm going to come in and I'm going to just put in some leaves here. And then I might come in and take the edge off of them a little bit. And we'll put some in over here. When you're doing your leaves, you want to make sure that you're changing up your color a bit. You don't want to have all the same color on your leaves. You want to try and keep them where you're changing things up. And I'm going to put in a few just bits of green as well, just to we'll put a lighter leaf in over here. Again, you see I'm holding my brush back on the end here. I'm keeping this relatively light. I'm going to put in a little bit of a darker color here, so maybe some burnt sienna. We'll put some darker ones in here. Just kind of have some marks. Might have one kind of come up over that flower there. Push it back a little bit, but I'm going to have maybe some light hitting this edge of it, of that leaf. See? I'm going to go in with a lighter one and kind of come in over this one with some leaves there. Kind of push this guy back in behind. I don't want him to be out in the front where you're really looking at him. I'm going to take some of this darker green and I want to come right up at the end of, at the bottom of these leaves here. I want to come right up to my rose. What that will do, I'm just going to push it around. See how that made that edge pop? That whole edge just popped forward off of the painting. I'm going to keep this area a little bit looser over here. Don't want to have too much going on with the, like nothing too defined on that side. Now I feel like I want to, because my background is quite dark, I feel like I really should have some brighter leaves in here. So I'm actually going to do some nice bright green leaves. And you can put that over top of some of these here. Have it kind of coming in a little bit brighter on this side, so that they kind of pop forward more. Then you notice how I'm kind of like mixing my green colors together. That's just to keep it interesting. You know, you want to change up your greens. Don't just use the same old green. Throw a couple, a little bit more defined leaves right in there. You always want to keep in mind where your light's coming from. My light's coming from here, so I went there and I kind of got that spot here on the wrong side, so I'm going to lighten that up a little bit. And you see how my leaves are much more defined on this side than they are on this side. And that's because this is the area that I want you to focus on. So I'm going to, when I want you to focus on an area, I'm going to put way more texture and interest into that area. And why don't we take a little bit of our yellow here, or our white here too, and just put in some little bits like this so that it looks like there might be more roses back there. Doesn't that look nice when you kind of put in that impression of maybe another couple of roses in there? You can't really see them, but they might be there, kind of thing. A little bit more to that one. Make it stand out a little bit more. And I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to kind of cover that up a bit so it's behind those leaves. I think that looks quite nice for the background. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in with some of this white. I'm just going to redefine some of these petals here, but I really want them to stand out. Put more texture on them. I think it's important to come back to your queen rose as the last thing you do, because that queen rose is going to be, that's your focal point for this painting. At the same time, I don't want to lose my shadows here. I'm going to take in a little bit of that gray that I had. Make sure I don't lose that in the petals. You see how easy it is to wash things out? And that's my biggest struggle, and that's why I'm practicing these. The more I play with it, the more things start to get washed out. I want to make sure that this front is really nice and white, because that's the focal point of that rose. Put lots of thick texture on that. That should really draw your eye to that. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this petal here. I really want that petal to stand out. So I'm going to take some of this darker color here. I'm going to go in here and put that shadow back in. I want to really have a good shadow right on that one, because I'm finding that this petal in front is disappearing if I don't have that shadow. And I'm going to come in with that front petal there. See how much better that looks? Putting a little light on this side, just so it definitely comes up over that other one. And you have to just decide for yourself here how much you want to do before you're done, because you don't want to overdo it, because then you take a lot of that interest out of it. So I feel like I brought this petal out too far, so I'm going to take it back with the green. That's negative painting is what that is. Kind of cutting this petal off using the green. And I think I'm going to call that complete. I don't want to add anything more to the main rose, because if I do, I'll keep washing it out. And you see how that works. As soon as I went into that number 10, that value 10 titanium white, I started washing that rose out and I had to correct it. And that's one thing that as the artist, you'll learn your own habits and that sort of thing. And one of my bad habits is exactly that. I wash out the roses too much with that white. That's why I like to practice white roses like this. That way I can go in there and get better each time. I've gotten better now at recognizing when I'm doing that. And so then I can go back in and correct it. You just want to try and make sure that you keep going, keep moving on it. Don't let yourself overthink it too much, or you're going to get stiff in your painting. I already feel like this rose here is more stiff, for example, than say this one that I did. This rose here, I painted it a lot faster because I was just doing a little practice rose. So I painted it a lot faster. And you see it's quite a bit less stiff than this rose. I feel like this rose got a bit stiff on me. And that's because I had to keep going back in and correcting it due to my issue with the white. So So I hope that helped you, and I hope you learned something from that. And I will see you on the next video. I hope you enjoyed that lesson, and please like and subscribe. Also, please check out my website, www.rhondaleannestock.com. I have extra pictures on there. I have artwork. I'm going to be working on some course materials, which will be coming up, so stay tuned for that. And I hope you had a really good time, and please let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Thank you.